Hello and welcome to the Unfiltered Experience with Tara and Louisa.
We are two girls who speak the truth about the struggle of never feeling enough whilst growing up in a world of filters and comparison.
Here we will have raw, relatable and authentic conversations to empower you on your path to self-development.
Come with us on the journey of unlearning. Welcome back to another episode at the Unfiltered Experience. Welcome back to our relationship series. Today we're discussing attachment, but if you haven't already seen on our social media, we have released a course this time last week. And today we're going to discuss attachment, which is week 2 of our course. So our 6-week interactive course is a course that you can take whenever you like. There's a lot of courses that you can take that are live and you wait for the enrollment date. Ours is a one-time purchase that you can take and start whenever suits you. And the website that we used was Teachable. It's a really good interactive interface for courses. So you'll get a weekly video from us and then daily tasks to do over the 6 weeks. And on week 2, we're talking about attachment. So we thought we'd do an episode about
Our attachment.
Yeah.
Because we have pretty interesting stories about our attachment. And if you don't know what your attachment style is or anything about it, jump over to our course. We explain it all. So we won't double up and spend too much time talking about it here, but maybe just give you our experience on understanding where our attachment has come from and how that's formed us and our relationships. Because I think it's really important to know the person you attach to is usually a reflection of your childhood. So when you're like, why was I so attracted to this guy or girl? And you're like, that's probably why. When you have a little deep dive into your childhood, for me, it just made so much sense. The emotionally unavailable man represented my father. So it was just a complete recreation of that relationship. So anyway, we'll get into it. But yeah, it's really interesting.
Before we get into it though, we just wanted to shout out a brand that was kind enough to send us with no expectation their attachment journals. Now, Tara and I are really lazy.
Yes.
We haven't completed the entire journal, but it is incredible what they have done. The journals, so they're called I, Mind, Spirit. I'll put their link in the show notes. We don't really do a lot of brand stuff because we want to keep our content as authentic as possible. But with this brand, we're really impressed with their work.
It aligned. It really aligned with us. And to be honest, when this person reached out to us on socials, I was excited. I was like, yeah, I want to do this. So I think that Louisa and I would never really do something that we would never share something with you guys that we wouldn't want to do ourselves. So if it's a book that we've read and we really love it, we'll share it. If it's a brand or whatever, but we'll never really plug something for money. That's just not our intention. This is not why we created the podcast. But we will share with you resources that we really loved. So when we saw these books and this brand and this concept, it just really aligned with us and we wanted to do it. And so basically you choose your attachment, which is probably something that you'll learn after doing something like our course or a quiz or something like that on attachment. You'll find out what your style is and then you can jump into this journal where you can really unpack it further. And it's just really cool because it prompts you to look at yourself in another way, I would say.
Yes, it's incredibly dense, the journal. It goes really, really deep. But yeah, we just wanted to leave that resource in the episode for anyone that wants to do further attachment work. Please check them out. Let's get into the episode. Should we begin with an anxious attachment?
Yeah, I think anxious is probably the most common. And I only say that because avoidants tend not to look at their attachment. So if you are doing attachment work, you are probably anxious.
Yeah, usually. Because anxious leaves you in quite a bit of pain.
Yeah. You want relief. You want out. So you'll search for an answer. Because it's very uncomfortable to be in a situation where you're anxiously attached to somebody because it's all encompassing of your life.
Yeah, I feel like looking back at my past relationships before I had the knowledge of attachment theory, which is basically that when we're children, the way we're parented determines our attachment style because we have to attach to our caregivers to survive. And if there is a rupture in that relationship, it can create an insecure attachment. So for me, when I was entering into relationships as like a young girl, I would find myself so obsessed and attached to these guys. And like I had no awareness over the fact that me anxiously like waiting for a message from them or seeing their space in messaging me as like a negative thing, as something that was, I had no awareness over what was going on until going on a self-development and self-inquiry journey, and you find out about attachment. And then I look back at my relationships and I'm like, I didn't love them. That was attachment. Whereas now it's like I look at my partner and yes, there's attachment because that's me or a part of me that I'm healing, but there's also genuine love there. And I think it's so easy to feel like it's love, but as you get on with your life and as you get deep into this work, it's actually quite amazing to think about the question, like, how would I feel about this person if my attachment was secure?
And that is a question in our course because it's a very important one, and it's something that makes us reconsider, and it's something I spoke about last week in last week's episode on the effects of toxic relationships. And it wasn't until I was in a healthy relationship did I realize that that feeling comes from the heart. That feeling of love and warmth and like just care for this person comes from up top. Whereas that feeling of attachment and anxiety and longing and dread and fucking despair, that comes from my stomach. It's like this crippling, twisted, knotty feeling in my stomach that I can't survive without this person. And that is attachment. That is a very, very insecure attachment.
And I think like another cycle with anxious attachment, because I have this cycle with anxious attachment where the beginning of my relationship, I am super anxiously attached where I pedestal that person and I want their approval and I am reliant on them for validation. Not anymore, but like this is the pattern that can play out if I'm not looking at myself. And then once I've been with that person for like a longer period of time, all the sparkliness of popping them up on that pedestal wears off. I see them as human, and then my avoidance sets in and I push back and I pull back from the relationship because this person is human. And I'm like, a big part of anxious attachment is like people pleasing and putting somebody else's needs before your own and neglecting your own needs in pursuit of a relationship. And then the avoidance sets in because it's like this anger at myself for putting this person before my own and seeing them for their flaws as well and being like, hello, like this person is heavily flawed. Why have you done this? And pulling back in the relationship and getting like a bit of the ick. And then you go through this period of avoidance post that of like, you know, questioning the relationship and whether it's something you want to be in. And then often then I'll come back up to secure.
So it's like a pendulum.
Yeah.
To swing.
Yeah, well, I think that's some part of an anxious attachment that you don't always hear because like you're dealing with that first initial, I like this person, and so then you're anxiously attached waiting to see if they like you back. And then what happens down the track when you are in a safe and secure relationship or when you're in with a person for a long time? My ex-partner, this really played out when I was like 20, and I was so anxiously attached to him. He was overseas, and then the avoidance set in, and then I broke up with him and I did not cry a day at all. And obviously that relationship wasn't the right relationship for me, but it's been about working on that pattern and realizing that is all my responsibility and all of my stuff, and it's nothing to do with the other person.
I really relate to that in the aspect of when the anxiety wears off, you almost look at them as if they're not giving you what you need anymore, as in like you become addicted to that really sort of fulfilling feeling of it's like a high, like a little bit like a drug. So I used to think before being in the relationship I'm in now, if I don't feel that high intensity level with you anymore, I mistaken that as I don't love you anymore. And when that avoidance sets in, like you said, it's like, no, this isn't the right relationship. I've got to run. And unfortunately, what's on the other side of that is usually gold. Like it's usually a really healthy, secure relationship. But everybody sort of runs when the shininess wears off. And I think that most people in society have an unrealistic expectation of a relationship based on their attachment. Because it's like, if I don't feel this certain way, or if I fall into avoidance, I mistaken that for I've checked out. I'm not into this relationship anymore. And I think being an avoidant, I mean, I have anxious tendencies, don't get me wrong, but I tend to swing more to avoidance in relationships. Being in that space, I've had to do a lot of work around my expectations in relationships, because if it's not this high, I'm like, and my avoidance is kicking in because it's not that high, I'm like, I don't love you. And I spent a long time in my last relationship waiting for that moment to come back, and it never did. And that's okay. So I have two really clear experiences of, yes, stick around. The avoidance might just be avoidance. But also, if it's 2 years has gone by and you're still avoidant, maybe it isn't the right relationship. But I had this experience with my current relationship where that shininess wore off. Like it does, the honeymoon goes away. And you kind of start to think like, oh, like I'm not getting those butterflies anymore. I'm not getting that high level of anxiety. Is this the right relationship? Then you hold on and it turns out to be the love of your life. And I'm like, a lot of people leave, around that 2 year mark when the shininess wears off.
That is such an important message that we don't hear enough, that the one or the right relationship for you, it is really common to have periods of time where it's really hard and where you question that relationship. We have a mentor in our own mental health journeys that is, well ahead of us, and he's a lot older than us, who regularly talks about his long, successful relationship and marriage, and discusses how during that relationship at different times he has questioned the relationship. And to me, that's really healthy to know that, because I think it's really normal that when you tackle new things or you're tackling these wounds from childhood, it can feel global in your relationship, and pushing and healing through that together through the other side is something that's so worth having. It's like the dream, right? But you can't have a long-term relationship without doing the work on the relationship. And we're not sold that story. Like I'm sold on social media with these like couple TikToks or like movies where it's all just meant to be the honeymoon period the whole way through. And that's not the truth. And I think people can get stuck in that, oh no, is something wrong with my relationship or with me? Should I be experiencing something different because of the lie that we're sold? And I think like if this podcast is anything, it's we want to push you towards your authentic truth and just like let you know that we've had ups and downs in our relationships and we get through the other side, and it's really beautiful, and I'm sure there's more to come.
My therapist always says to me that he sees couples and he does relationship therapy. And he always sees couples running before the miracle happens. They leave their relationship before they get to that blissful, unconditional loving period. Because the reality is, in the first couple of years of a relationship, you don't know that person. You don't have that unconditional, undeniable love for them because you don't know them. What you are is you're in lust, you're in, fantasy, you're in expectation, you're in all of these sort of endorphins, like these good feelings, and then they wear off. Like it's science, it's fact. They go away, and you start to see this person for who they really are, and you get to choose in that moment, is this person who I want to be with? And 9 times out of 10 people want that lust, they want that feeling, and they leave. And he has always said to me, being in a long-term relationship himself, there is something so special about going through the hard yards with this person, sticking by them, and then coming out the other side. He just said it's a love you can't explain, and not many people get to have it because not many people are willing to do the work, and they're not willing to stick around.
Yeah, as soon as someone shows them flaws, they're out. And I'm not talking about actual abusive situations where you need to leave, because absolutely, if it feels right in your gut, then go. But that's why I think like having support, like a therapist or like your close friends around you, and checking in with them about the truth of your relationship and utilizing someone to grow with you. Like we've had that along our journey. We've both been like working on ourselves and trying to develop our self-esteem and our beliefs and whatnot. So when I have been trying to grow in a relationship, you've always been this like encyclopedia of Louisa that knows when things are me or when, okay, that's an issue with the relationship. You need to navigate that.
I just wanted to state, because usually there's a clear line, right, in the sand. You're anxious, you're avoidant, or you're this or you're that, whatever. I've always, when I've done certain quizzes or like, like those online tools where you're figuring out your love style or your attachment style or whatever it is, I'm always equally spread across the results. Like I'm not clearly in one camp or another. And I found that to be really interesting because for me, it really depends on who I'm in a relationship with as to what gets triggered. So if I'm in a relationship, which my last relationship was quite unavailable, like he was toxic and he was unhealthy, he was horrible, and so I was just like dying for his love, like just give me anything. And I compromised. Like I just really related to what you were saying earlier about compromising the needs of yourself. I neglected my whole self, and I never got to see that relationship through because he left in the end and I was left with the what if. And I feel like that's almost harder than having like a clear definition about it was either right or it wasn't right. But going into the next relationship and you're meeting someone who's like, very available, very caring, outwardly loving, I move into this avoidance. And it's like, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know where to sit with that. I don't know how it's meant to feel. I don't know how to respond because I'm so used to chasing. I'm not used to being met halfway with love. And it was really interesting for me to do the work and find out where this all originates. And it originates from having this childhood dynamic of a father that was never there. He was there, but him and my mum split up and then there was some issues and he wasn't around. And I also then had a mother who treated me like a friend, who really relied on me for emotional support. So when I say I'm split down the middle of the results, like I have both scenarios to put me in either situation depending on the person I'm with, which just makes it 10 times harder to do the work, right? Because it's like, where do I do the work? Do I do the work in anxiety? Do I do it in avoidance? And it's just been a really interesting insight that I've learned about myself, that if you're listening and you're thinking, I don't know what I am because I'm different with everybody, just maybe think like, what was your experience like as a child? Like, were your parents in maybe a similar situation?
Those early childhood relationships are so fundamental to the rest of our life, especially when it comes to romantic relationships and even friendships. In our course on week 2, when you do the attachment week, we get you to do like an educational video on what attachment is. So you do basically like a crash course on attachment styles. And then we get you to ask these introspective questions about how your attachment manifests from childhood, but also within your most recent relationship. It's really interesting because when we became friends, I didn't know you had anxious attachment in you. You were so avoidant because the relationship you were in at the time, it was just avoidance central. And so it wasn't like until 3 years into our friendship that I saw your anxiousness play out. And you always talked about how, I've got anxious attachment somewhere in there, da-da-da. And I was like, I don't believe you. Like, you are as avoidant as they come.
It's in there. Don't worry.
And then I saw it play out and I was like, wow, isn't that amazing? Like, depending on who you're with, they bring out whatever side it is of you, like whatever is the opposite.
My take-home message has been always, the more red flaggy the guy, the more anxious I am. The more healthy the person, the more I am secure. And that has been something that I've tried my hardest to rewrite in my story is I don't want to be with another person that triggers my attachment. I don't want to be with someone who puts me into a state where I need to do the work, like I want to be with someone who gives me unconditional love, that meets me halfway, that shows up as a whole human being so I can show up as a whole human being. And I feel like that's what I've attracted in my marriage now. Like it's a healthy dynamic. And I truly believe that the longer you spend time with a secure person, the more you become secure.
Yeah, it's funny because on the other side of that, my partner is 1000% secure and healthy. However, at the beginning of the relationship, he does, if he was to fall on a spectrum, he'd have some avoidance. But at the beginning of the relationship, I was just as anxious as if it was a toxic partner. And it took me so long for my nervous system to like re-regulate to the fact that I was safe. And intellectually, I know my partner would never, ever cheat on me, would never do anything wrong by me, is like 1000% as safe. He didn't even want to sleep with anyone when we weren't exclusive. Like he's very safe. However, I was so wired to be anxiously attached to someone when I start a relationship. Like I was just so wired to feel not good enough when I start a new relationship that like even when this person was like very much into me and respecting my boundaries, I would take his security within himself as rejection. And it's taken like 3 years to adjust to like a secure standard. Like for me, if the other person's anxious, then I felt secure because it was like they're overly attached to me, right? So I'm constantly being fed like love and validation. So then I felt safe. But when he was giving me like just a secure amount, I was like, oh my God, the gaps, right? Because I've talked about on a previous episode, like the unhealthy amount of validation I got from love bombing and how that set up this really unhealthy expectation in a secure relationship because that was what I was used to. So yeah, it's funny, like, and I think that's like such a marker for self-development that no two journey is the same and that things can mean different things. Everyone has a different experience with their attachment style or with their journey or with what their relationships mean. It took me a while to thaw out and regulate and become safe.
I think what I did was take time between relationships. And I feel like, I wanted a relationship, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like I was sitting at home celibate. I was seeing people and I was out and about, but I truly believe that the universe kept guiding me back to myself. And I went through, in that year period of being single between relationships, and there was a little bit of like a month fling kind of in the middle, which really fucking broke me, if I'm honest. Like,
Tortured Poets Department.
Yeah, that was relate, #me too.
Yeah.
That was a really eye-opening experience for me that brought me back to myself in terms of what I needed to heal, because I noticed every time that I was having a bad feeling about myself or I was feeling insecure, or even if I was just feeling a little bit empty, like I wanted to reach for that person to feel better. And what I had to do was learn to reach to myself, which is just sounds so corny, but I feel like that relationship that you build with yourself is paramount when you go into that next relationship, because by the time I went into the next relationship, I kind of had this feeling, and I remember, my partner and I were a bit on and off at the start. There was like a few hiccups along the way, but he taught me that I could live without him. And that was a really important sort of belief system that I needed to have, was that I am going to be okay and I don't need you. And I learned that because I learned how to be there for myself. And it was excruciatingly painful going through that heartbreak and torment and being alone, like that is a position I never want myself or anybody to be in again. But there is always a silver lining in everything. And the silver lining for me was that I learned that I will not die if I don't have this relationship. And I feel like it took the pressure off. Like I didn't need this person. I didn't need this relationship. So it's just an added bonus to my life. And I think that set me up for a sort of like healing my attachment in the relationship.
You fully surrendered.
Yeah.
And the gold happens when you surrender.
Apparently so.
One thing I will say is we haven't actually touched on disorganized attachment, but we aren't going to speak to that today because we just don't have time. But we will see you back here next week to continue our relationship series.
Strap yourselves in. See you soon.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode.
If you liked it, please share it with someone you think would benefit from it, or share it on your socials and tag us.
If you don't already, follow us on TikTok and Instagram to stay up to date with us and our latest self-development courses.
Thank you for listening.